the game. And oh yeah, the comeback victory against Penn State in the fourth quarter. So there's so many moments of adversity that he's been able to overcome, and the resiliency that he has been also able to show as well. But also you have to remember, the last three quarterbacks to go #1 overall didn't throw at the combine either. Speaking of Cam Ward, Bryce Young, then also Caleb Williams. So I don't think there's anything for him to gain by throwing at the combine.
Yeah, and there was a lot more of a question mark really about those quarterbacks and who exactly was going to go #1. There seems to be absolutely no question here this year. But there are players who are going to need to go to Indy and really show out. So give me a couple of guys that you think have a lot to prove this week.
There's two guys that I have circled, Hannah, and the first one is Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson. I think he's one of the most polarizing prospects in this entire draft class, and I say that because from September through November, there was a stretch where a lot of people thought that he could be potentially the first quarterback off of the board, but he suffered some injuries and then got into the month of December, and things just dwindled and declined around him, and then some injuries that he suffered as well. So Ty Simpson definitely is one. He reportedly is expected to throw at the combine, so I'm interested to see exactly how he does there. And then the next one is Jermon McCoy, the cornerback out of Tennessee. And if we're strictly stacking the talent in this year's draft class, there's no question that he's one of the 10 best players in this year's class, but he did suffer an ACL tear back in January. We did not see him play at all last season, so medicals is going to be really big for him at the combine. He has a pro day on March 31st, so I'm really interested to see what he does exactly at the combine, or does he wait to his pro day to actually do everything?
Yeah, and before that torn ACL, he was an All-American in 2024, helped lead the Vols to the college football playoff. Jordan, we're going to be seeing
beginning on Thursday. Over 300 players, let's go, are expected to take part in the event, including Heisman Trophy winner Fernando Mendoza, Notre Dame running back Jeremiah Love, Miami pass rush standout Reuben Bain Jr., U.S. just scored. ESPN NFL draft analyst Matt Miller joins the program now. Matt, good morning to you. Give us your top 3 storylines heading into the combine this week.
Guys, the big one, I want to see which pass rusher separates themselves from the pack this year. We have 3 elite edge rushers at the top of this group. Guys like Reuben Bain Jr. from Miami, Arvell Reese from Ohio State, and then we have David Bailey, from Texas Tech. So who's going to separate themselves in this group? Who's going to stand out as that elite pass rusher? The player that comes out of the combine at the top of this group could be the #2 overall pick in this year's draft. So really important to see who rises from that pack, who stands out in terms of workouts, interviews, medicals, and then meetings with teams. That's going to be huge for these pass rushers. And then at the quarterback position, who is the #2 quarterback in this class? Ty Simpson from Alabama looks to be that player. Can he get himself into the first round of this group? We know Fernando Mendoza is going to go early, but can Ty Simpson be that #2 quarterback? Can he get into the top 20 picks of this year's draft? Teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers definitely need him to rise in this group. And then could we see the 40-yard dash record fall? Brennan Thompson from Mississippi State is an elite runner. We've seen the vertical speed from him. He led the SEC in receiving yards this past year. We know that he has, that ability to run. Can he get into that 4-2-1 area with Xavier Worthy, who broke that just 2 years ago? I think he's got a shot to do it this year, guys.
Maybe the answer to this next question is located within that group that you just outlined. But which player, Matt, are you most excited to see this week, and why?
I'll go to Ohio State. Sonny Styles, the linebacker, 6'4", 245 pounds with elite athletic ability. If he works out, I think Sonny Styles is the player that we'll be talking about all week long in terms of what he does from the vertical jump, 40-yard dash, 3-code drill, and then the position-specific drills. Styles is one of the most athletic players in this year's class, so he has the opportunity to be that guy that we're talking about days after the combine of who won the event and whose stock was boosted the most by what we saw in Indianapolis.
Matt, how would evaluators evaluate you battling through what seems to be a bit of a hoarse voice this morning?
Laryngitis.
Yeah. I give you top billing.
Yeah, draft season, a lot of talking. Sorry, guys.
Blue guy.
Yeah, we're just getting started, though. Yeah, Matt Miller hanging out with us this morning on SportsCenter. Matt, much appreciated.
1 week away from on-field workouts between the linebackers
and the defensive linemen at the Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. A perfect day to focus on these two positions, and they are going to fly off the board fast. As a matter of fact, I had 6 edge rushers in the top 20 of my mock draft last week, starting with Arvell Reese going 2nd overall to New York Jets. He's followed by David Bailey and Ruben Bain Jr., also in the top 10. By the way, there have not been 6 edge rushers taken in the top 20 since 2011. All right, so Matt, this is a unique situation with Arvell Reese. He's a classic example of a guy who some people think is going to be an edge full-time in the NFL. Some others think he might just be a linebacker because for probably more snaps in his college career was just a stand-up inside linebacker. That's where you have him listed in your evaluation. Over the next couple of weeks, how are teams going to be evaluating the potential versatility for Arvell Reese?
Yeah, Field, it reminds me a lot of when Micah Parsons was coming out of Penn State, and we had this similar conversation about there's so much potential at edge, but the tape is at linebacker. And I think with Arvell Reese, it's funny because he had 6.5 sacks last year, 3 were at middle linebacker, 3.5 were off the edge. So it was very much balanced in how he was used at Ohio State as a blitzer versus a full-time rusher. Personally, I think you start him out at linebacker and build in that edge rusher profile, which again is what we saw Dallas do with Micah Parsons as a rookie. He played off-ball linebacker, 1st and 2nd down. 3rd down, he was a situational pass rusher. Now, I think you're the New York Jets and you're drafting number 2 overall. Maybe you just put him right on the edge because Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald IV haven't been that premier edge talent that we expected them to be when they were picked in the 1st round of their own respective drafts. But each team is going to have to go through that evaluation and say, number 1, how do we just get this young man on the field because he's going to be a top 6 or 7 pick? And then the other question becomes, once you get him into your room and you kind of see where he's at in terms of the pass rush profile, hand usage, the game plan that he has, then I think you can start to build that toolbox and make him into more of a full-time rusher.
Yeah, the interesting thing about him is that he definitely does feel, I'm just going to jump right in here. He definitely does have that skill set that allows you to kind of deploy him however you see fit from week to week. And obviously Ohio State saw the same thing because you saw just this past year how the number of snaps that he took on the line of scrimmage really ramped up, and they outpaced the number of snaps that he took off ball. You see the percentages, how they went up from 24 to 25. And I'm sure that Arvell Reese is not mad at that because when we're talking about where guys get paid in the NFL, you get paid when you're up on the line of scrimmage and you're rushing the passer. And he has those kind of skills, and clearly Ohio State tried to really feature them when you look at the tape of how they use them. Look, first of all, I think on the outside, when they go 4 down and they're rushing in a sub-rush situation, meaning they're having 5 defensive backs on the field, you see the edge speed, you see the cornering ability. But then you can move him inside as a 3 technique, as a stand-up joker type, and just match him up against an offensive guard that you know he's going to overwhelm, just like Micah Parsons is able to do, just like Abdul Carter was able to do in his last year at Penn State, who, as a matter of fact, as we all know, Abdul Carter asked Penn State to move him to a down lineman position. Why? Because he knows that those guys are at a premium in the NFL. That's exactly what I believe Arvell's going to eventually want and what he's going to transition to.
Yeah, I think so as well. That is where you get paid. And again, we're talking about someone that will be drafted maybe number 2 by the New York Jets. I can't imagine he gets much deeper than that. Maybe the 6th overall pick is kind of the floor for him. So if you're going to draft someone that early, you're probably going to want to pay them as an edge rusher over a linebacker, an off-ball linebacker at least. But I do think we have some recent comparisons. Micah Parsons, Abdul Carter, those are guys that you can look at and model. And I don't think he's alone in this draft class as a player we're going to have this conversation about, because we'll talk about him later in the show. Anthony Hill Jr. from Texas has some snaps at edge rusher that look better than his snaps at off ball. So I think for these teams at the top of the draft, Reese is interesting. And then as we get into round 2, maybe round 3, Anthony Hill will be a player that we talk about in much the same way.
I think we all agreed that the range for Arvell Reese could be as early as number 2 overall out of the Jets and perhaps somewhere in the top 10, if not number 2. And I think as you think about the value of that pick, while off-ball linebackers like Fred Warner are great players that can change the complexion of your defense, just from an asset allocation standpoint, if you're taking a player number 2 overall, I believe that he's got to become an edge at some point full-time in his NFL career to justify the utilization of that pick, especially for a team like the Jets that was 31st in sacks last season in the NFL. They had 26 total as a team. Only the Niners had fewer sacks than the Jets in 2024. 5. Anyways, earlier this week I gave you the top defensive linemen to watch ahead of the Combine. Today I'm just giving you the top 5 linebackers, in my estimation, in this class. Let's start with number 5. Let's begin down in Austin, Texas, with Anthony Hill Jr., a guy who I think the tape sometimes can be a little bit up and down, but at his best, he is a hyper-athletic, fast trigger, playmaking linebacker. He's got some sack production over each of the past 2 years, production of the passing game as well with interceptions, and also a forced fumble-making machine. I think a guy who goes somewhere in the first 2 rounds of the upcoming draft. We'll stay in the SEC. I'm still getting used to calling Texas and Missouri SEC schools. My number 4 linebacker, though, is a familiar name for those that have watched football for the past 20 years. It's Josiah Trotter from Missouri. Yes, the son of Jeremiah Trotter, the younger brother of Jeremiah Trotter Jr. He's very different than his brother, though, who got taken by the Eagles in the 5th round a couple of years ago. Smaller linebacker, more fluid athlete. This is a thumper. This is a guy that wants to meet you head-to-head, take you face on. This is an old-school throwback linebacker, has some shades of his father's game in his current skill set. Let's go to number 3 here, and this is a player just a couple of years ago was playing at the University of Central Arkansas. Jake Golday's got great range, 6'3", 240 pounds, got some playmaking as well. He is all over the field, though, for that Cincinnati defense. Had a terrific final season for the Bearcats, a guy who I do think has a chance to go in the first 40 or so selections. Really, really impressive rise over the past couple of seasons for Jake Golday. Number 2, you won't be surprised by the top 2 players on this list. C.J. Allen, who's 20 years old, he turns 21 on March 1st, just about a week and a half away from right now. Natural quarterback. He's been playing in this Georgia defense for the past 3 seasons, had his best season this past year, including 3.5 sacks. Incredibly smart player, great football IQ, outstanding leadership. I use the word safe with C.J. Allen, not to suggest he doesn't have a high ceiling, but to say that I think this guy's going to be a darn good pro no matter what happens, and certainly has some big-time potential as well. Finally, last but not least, I don't think anybody will be surprised to hear that Sonny Styles from Ohio State is the number 1 inside linebacker on